Miss Carter, this is a courthouse, not a place for children to play games.
Judge Grayson's voice, the presiding judge shouted, cutting through the dead quiet air. The courtroom was packed. Seasoned attorneys folded their arms and sneered the gallery, murmuring as if witnessing a farce. In that coldness, a 16-year-old girl was forced to face an entire legal system where power and mockery seemed to have joined hands. But Amelia Carter did not bow her head. Though her face flushed with embarrassment, her eyes still blazed with resolve. Before her was the judge's contempt. Behind her, the snickers. And beside her, a client drowning in despair. Amelia drew a deep breath, straightening the trembling stack of files in her hands. No one expected that this moment, one that looked like pure hopelessness, would open a confrontation of seismic proportions where a teenage girl could shake a system that had made grown men bow. The courtroom sank into silence. Judge Theodore Grayson leaned back in his chair, a smug smile flickering across his lips. His voice rang through the chamber, slow yet laced with derision. "Miss Carter, do you know where you're standing?" Facing him was a girl with messy curls, wearing a simple hoodie and faded jeans. Her sneakers gave off a faint squeak as she moved across the glossy wooden floor. The judge tilted his head, his tone turning icier. "This is a court of law, not a high school debate club." A ripple of snickers spread from the attorneys' benches. A few even traded mocking looks. But the girl remained standing there alone at the defense table, clutching a thick stack of papers as if it were heavier than she was. Her face flushed with tension, but her gaze never left the judge. "Your Honor." Her voice came calmer than anyone expected. "I am here to—" "That's enough." Judge Grayson swept a hand, cutting her off. "This court has no time for childish games. I truly don't understand why the counsel permitted this absurdity." Laughter rose again. But Amelia Carter, that was the girl's name, lifted her chin. Her voice rang clear and steady. "If you would allow me to speak, you might find this worth hearing." The courtroom froze. A teenager daring to speak on equal footing with a judge almost unheard of. Grayson narrowed his eyes, the derisive smile twisting into a curl of contempt. "Very well. Enlighten us, then." Amelia inhaled, reorganized the papers in her hands, and began. Each sentence flowed with poise and solid reasoning, citing provisions of the Constitution and legal precedents alike. Within minutes, the air in the room shifted. The attorneys who had scoffed moments ago now bent over their pads, scribbling furiously. Judge Grayson, for his part, moved from triumphant to astonished. "Who are you?" he blurted, unable to maintain his scorn. Amelia paused, a faint smile touching her lips. "I'm Amelia Carter, and I'm here to defend my client." At once, the courtroom erupted into chaos. Questions hurled from every direction. The judge slammed his gavel hard, yet even he couldn't hide his confusion. A teenager who had never attended law school could shake an entire court. In that instant, the smile on Amelia's lips trembled. Her confidence wavered, and every eye swung back to her, waiting for an explanation. 2 weeks earlier, in a small room buried in books, Amelia sat among stacks of law texts and thick notebooks. They had belonged to her brother James, who had once studied tirelessly for the bar, only James was no longer there. Amelia saw them as the legacy he left behind, and she swore to continue that path. "You're crazy, Amelia Lilly," her best friend said around a mouthful of potato chips on the bed. "You're 16. You're not a lawyer." Amelia looked up, eyes unwavering. "I don't care. Someone has to do it, and James believed I could." Lilly fell silent. She understood the pain her friend had carried since the day James died. Everyone treated Amelia like a fragile child, a crystal vase that would shatter at the slightest touch. Parents, neighbors, teachers, all of them stepped carefully around her. But Amelia was not weak. She longed to prove the opposite, that she was strong enough to protect others just as her brother once had. Page after page, note after note, case after case, she pored over them every night. Lily often called it a mad obsession, but Amelia knew clearly this was the only path to turn pain into strength. Back in the courtroom, the tension was so thick it could be cut with a knife. Miss Carter, the judge asked, his voice slow. "Are you asserting that you're qualified to represent the defendant?" Amelia nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. I've studied the entire case and every relevant precedent. I believe I'm capable." Grayson folded his arms, raising an eyebrow. "You only believe so. This isn't a game. Then allow me to prove it." Before anyone could react, the rear doors of the courtroom swung open. A tall man in a gray suit stepped in. His resonant voice filled the room. "Your Honor, perhaps I can shed some light on this situation." Amelia turned. For the first time, the confidence vanished from her face. Who was this man? And why did he appear at this exact moment? The air suddenly grew heavy to the point of suffocation. Everyone sensed that the truth was about to be revealed, and it could change everything. All eyes immediately focused on the stranger. The whispering swelled. Who was he, and why had he come now? "Excuse me, who are you?" "And on what authority do you interrupt my court?" Judge Grayson's voice regained its command, ringing sternly. The man stopped right before the bench and gently set his briefcase on the table. He bowed his head respectfully. "My apologies, Your Honor. I am Daniel Hayes, representing the Bar Association." A wave of surprise rippled through the room. Amelia felt her heart pounding, her eyes fixed on the man. Why would someone from the Bar Association show up here? Was it because of her? Grayson frowned. The Bar Association. And what do they have to do with this case? Mr. Hayes opened his briefcase, pulled out a file, flipped a few pages, then looked up. "Not the case itself, Your Honor, but the matter of legal representation. We received an anonymous tip that an unlicensed individual is acting as counsel in this courtroom, and that is extremely serious." The atmosphere instantly grew oppressive. Amelia felt her stomach knot. She had spent an entire year studying, preparing for this moment. Now everything could collapse. Grayson smirked. The glint of mockery returned. "You see, Mr. Hayes, this is exactly the irregularity I mentioned. Carter has never had formal training. Her presence here is hard to accept." Amelia bit her lip, then suddenly stepped forward, her voice ringing strong, though tinged with desperation. "Your Honor, I understand this is unconventional, but I have studied, I have prepared as thoroughly as any lawyer. My client deserves a fair defense." A soft murmur of agreement rose around the court. A few attorneys who had mocked her now looked at Amelia differently with a hint of respect. Grayson's brows knit tighter, displeased by the shifting mood. But it was Hayes who spoke calm and steady. "Your Honor, it's true this is outside the norm, but justice exists to protect, not to obstruct. I believe at the very least we should hear Miss Carter's full presentation." The judge was silent for a few seconds, his gaze passing over Amelia and returning to Hayes. At last, he sighed. "Very well. Miss Carter, I will allow you to proceed temporarily. But if I find you are wasting the court's time, you will be held in contempt. Is that clear?" "Clear, Your Honor." Amelia answered, her voice trembling with relief. She drew a deep breath, ready to launch into her defense. Only a year earlier, Amelia had still been just an ordinary girl, spending more time hanging out with friends than thinking about courtrooms. But everything changed the day her brother James was arrested. James was a hero in Amelia's eyes. Smart, kind, always protective of his little sister. He was only a few months away from graduating law school, but a barroom brawl ruined everything. The other man was a wealthy businessman who insisted James struck first. James protested his innocence. It had been self-defense. Amelia's parents were powerless, unable to afford a good attorney. The court-appointed public defender was overworked, indifferent, almost unengaged. In the end, James was sentenced to 3 years in prison. When she heard the verdict, Amelia went numb. The justice her brother had believed in had betrayed him. But instead of collapsing, Amelia chose to rise. She would study the law, she would fight so that no one else would have to endure what James had. Back in the courtroom, Amelia presented her arguments with renewed force. Her voice was steady sharp. Piece by piece, she laid out evidence and financial figures that exposed the company's murkiness, not her client's. Mr. Peterson, a middle-aged man accused of embezzlement, sat beside her trembling, but a spark of hope flickered in his eyes. Amelia cited legal precedents emphasizing the right to a fair investigation. The entire courtroom fell silent. Even Grayson leaned forward, eyes fixed on the young girl. In that moment, Amelia felt a flare of hope. Maybe she really could do this. But then Mr. Hayes stood up. His voice was calm, yet no less firm. Your Honor, no matter how persuasive Miss Carter's arguments are, the reality remains unchanged. She is not a licensed attorney. Allowing her to continue would set a dangerous precedent. The room rippled again. Judge Grayson grew stern and turned to Amelia, Miss Carter. I will give you one last chance. Who authorized you to stand here as counsel? Amelia faltered. Her heart pounded wildly. This was the question she had prepared for so long, but now, when it truly rang out, words suddenly became heavy. The whole court held its breath, waiting for an answer that could change everything. Amelia's confidence wavered. She drew a deep breath, lips parting to answer. But at that very moment, the courtroom doors opened again. Not a neatly dressed lawyer, but a boy of about 10. Amelia, his voice rang out, slicing through the taut air. Amelia whipped around, eyes widening in astonishment. "Ethan?" she whispered, hardly believing it. The boy ran toward her, a crumpled envelope clenched in his hand. "You forgot this," Ethan said, holding up the envelope. Amelia froze. Her heart thudded as she recognized instantly what the envelope was. She had never intended for it to appear here, least of all under the gaze of a packed courtroom. But now, with hundreds of eyes fixed on her, she couldn't avoid it. Miss Carter Grayson's cold voice sounded. "What is in there?" Amelia hesitated, her hand trembling as it closed around the envelope. She wished she could make it disappear. "It is not related to this case, Your Honor." A flash of suspicion lit the judge's eyes. "If you are concealing something important to these proceedings, the consequences will be severe." Amelia bit her lip. Ethan tugged gently at her sleeve, his clear eyes lifted full of trust. "Show them, sis," he whispered. That innocent plea squeezed Amelia's chest. She knew the boy only wanted to help, but the price of this truth could ruin everything. She glanced at her client Peterson, his face a mixture of confusion and fear. Then she looked back to the envelope and slowly tore along the seam with careful fingers. The room was deathly still. Everyone held their breath. Inside the envelope, a letter emerged. The handwriting was neat, heartbreakingly familiar James's. Amelia's throat tightened as she reread the lines she had long since memorized. It was the letter James had written to her before he entered prison, full of encouragement, hope, and a challenge. Stand up for those who cannot stand up, no matter how impossible it seems. Amelia's hands shook as she folded the letter and held it tight. "This is private," she said, her gaze unwavering as she looked straight at the judge. "It has nothing to do with the case." The room fell into pin-drop silence. Judge Grayson watched her for a long moment, then exhaled. "Very well, but listen carefully, Miss Carter. This is your last chance. Any further disruption and I will have to remove you from this courtroom." Amelia nodded, slightly relief washing over her as if she had just escaped an abyss. She bent down and whispered to Ethan, "Thank you. Now go sit with Lily." The boy nodded, running to the back of the room where Lily was watching anxiously. Amelia turned back to face the judge, ready to continue. But once again, the doors swung open. This time, it wasn't a child or a lawyer. It was a tall woman with a severe face. She wore a dark blazer, her hair tightly pulled into a bun, each step carrying an air of authority. Her voice rang out sharp as a blade slicing through the air. "Your Honor, I am Margaret Steele from the District Attorney's Office. I'm here to address a matter of utmost importance." Grayson furrowed his brow. "Miss Steele, your appearance is highly unusual. What could possibly justify interrupting my court?" Her icy gaze fixed on Amelia. "It concerns the unauthorized presence of this individual and the grave consequences if she is allowed to continue." The room burst into chaos again. Amelia went cold. Steele hadn't come to support her, she had come to take her down. Order, Grayson barked, striking the gavel hard. Miss Steele, explain yourself at once. Margaret Steele nodded, her voice chill. Of course, Your Honor. I am here to inform you that... Margaret Steele strode forward, her cold eyes trained directly on the judge. Your Honor, allowing Miss Carter to proceed would constitute a serious breach of professional ethics. As a representative of the District Attorney's Office, it is my responsibility to safeguard the integrity of this court. Amelia's chest tightened. She had fought too long to get here, and now everything seemed to be turning against her. Even so, she could not give up, not when her client's future was entirely in her hands. Your Honor, Amelia spoke steady, though fear roiled inside. I only ask for the chance to prove myself. I don't have a law degree, but I have studied, I have prepared, and I believe I am the most suitable person to defend my client. The entire courtroom fell silent. Grayson looked at her, his eyes unreadable, then glanced at Steele, at Hayes, and swept his gaze across the gallery. The tension stretched like a string about to snap. Finally, he tapped the gavel lightly. I will allow the hearing to continue, but Miss Carter, you are walking on very thin ice. One mistake, and I will stop this immediately. Is that clear, Your Honor? Amelia replied, relief trembling in her voice. But that relief lasted only a few seconds. Steele took a step forward, the corner of her mouth curling into a cold smile. In that case, Your Honor, I'd like to call my first witness. Amelia froze. A witness? Who? The courtroom doors opened, and the man who stepped in made Amelia's blood turn to ice. Victor Grant, a wealthy businessman, the one who had driven her brother James into a cage of law. Amelia stepped back half a pace. Why was he here? What did he have to do with Peterson's case? And what was Steele planning? Grant walked with smug assurance, a deep navy suit hugging his frame, a crooked smile that made Amelia's skin prickle. Your Honor, this is Mr. Victor Grant. Steele said confidently. His testimony will show why Miss Carter cannot continue in any capacity as legal representative. The presence of this witness is highly irregular. Grayson frowned. Explain yourself, Miss Steele. How is he relevant? Steele tilted her head, her voice unwavering. Your Honor, Mr. Grant has critical information regarding Miss Carter's background and motives. His testimony will expose why she is unfit even in an unofficial capacity. Amelia felt her palms grow slick with sweat. This was clearly a trap. She glanced at Peterson, the unfortunate man beside her, his face tense and full of doubt. Your Honor, I object. Amelia stood at once, her voice firm. This testimony has nothing to do with Mr. Peterson's case. It is merely a scheme to smear me personally. Miss Carter, I am the one who decides what is relevant. Grayson cut in. Mr. Grant, please take the stand. Grant sat in the witness chair, his arrogant smile unchanged. Amelia gripped the edge of the table, bracing herself to stay calm. Steele began, Mr. Grant. Can you describe your prior connection to Miss Carter, of course? Grant replied, his voice cloyingly sweet. I first met her during her brother's trial. He was convicted of assaulting me after a bar brawl. The evidence was clear, and the court found him guilty. The room buzzed. Amelia's cheeks burned. Grant was not only dredging up a painful past, but twisting it to her disadvantage. Steele continued, her tone honeyed yet venomous. And during that time, how did Miss Carter behave disruptively? Grant feigned a sigh. She showed up at every hearing looking at me as if I were a monster. After the case ended, she didn't stop. Letters, phone calls, constant harassment, obsession. Amelia sprang up. Your Honor, this has nothing to do with Peterson's case. This is nothing but a personal attack. Sit down, Miss Carter Grayson growled. Amelia bit her lip and sat turmoil raging inside. Grant wasn't wrong that she'd persistently written and called trying to seek justice for James. But that wasn't obsession, it was love and faith in the truth. Steele delivered the blow. In your view, with conduct like that, is Miss Carter fit to represent a client in court? Grant didn't hesitate. Absolutely not. She's emotionally unstable and has no respect for the legal system. Allowing her to act like a lawyer is inviting danger into this courtroom. Each word felt like a punch to Amelia's chest. She clenched her fists, forcing back the scream rising in her throat. She wanted to expose him as the man who had destroyed her family. But if she lost her composure, he would win. Steele turned to the judge, her eyes gleaming like a cat about to pounce. "Your Honor, I believe this testimony is sufficiently clear." Margaret Steele did not miss her chance. She turned straight to the judge, her voice resolute. "Your Honor, this testimony clearly shows why Miss Carter should not be allowed to proceed. Her conduct during her brother's trial demonstrates a lack of professionalism and objectivity. She is unfit to represent anyone." Amelia shot to her feet, her voice ringing, her eyes blazing with anger. "Your Honor, this is absurd. Mr. Grant is not a neutral witness. He is the one who slandered my brother." Murmurs surged again. Judge Grayson brought the gavel down hard. "Order. Miss Carter, if you do not maintain proper decorum, I will hold you in contempt." Amelia drew a deep breath, forcing herself to regain composure. "Your Honor," she said, her voice low but resolute, "Mr. Grant's testimony is biased and irrelevant to Mr. Peterson's case. If this court truly cares about justice, I request the right to cross-examine." Grayson hesitated, clearly torn. At last, he nodded. "Very well, Miss Carter. You may proceed." Amelia stepped forward, her heart thundering. This was a chance to turn the tide, but also a deadly trap. Grant was seasoned in manipulation, and behind him stood Steele. She began, her tone. "Even Mr. Grant, you say I was disruptive during my brother's trial." Specifically how Grant smirked, I don't need to explain. Everyone saw how you behaved. "That is not an answer," Sir Amelia replied calmly. "If you accuse present evidence. Otherwise, your words are merely your personal opinion." Grant's smile faltered. "Fine. You shouted, argued, refused to accept the verdict. And you claim that my fighting for my brother's innocence means I am unfit to defend my client today." "Exactly. You're too emotional." Amelia narrowed her eyes. "Too emotional. Or too determined to stop people like you from exploiting the system for personal gain." The entire courtroom erupted. Grayson leaned forward, his voice a warning. "Miss Carter, mind your words." "Yes, Your Honor," Amelia replied, her gaze still locked on Grant. "Mr. Grant, let's talk about the security footage from the bar that night. Do you remember why it was never presented in court?" Grant's face darkened for a moment. "It was excluded. Inadmissible." "Why was it? Because it contradicted your testimony." Amelia's voice was razor sharp. Grant snapped. "I'm not here to relitigate that case, no. You're here to smear me. But if my credibility is to be questioned, then so is yours." The air was taut enough to burst. Grant opened his mouth to strike back when a shrill sound ripped through the back of the room. Thud. Every eye swung toward the doors. A man appeared, face pale, breathing hard. In his hand was a USB drive, clenched as if it were a lifeline. "I have evidence." His voice shook, but carried. "Evidence that proves what she's saying is true." The courtroom exploded. Amelia froze, her heart pounding as if it would leap from her chest. The man staggered forward. His suit rumpled, the haunted eyes of someone who had wrestled with himself for a long time before making this choice. Order, Grayson roared, raising his gavel. "Who are you, and what do you mean by storming into my court?" The man drew a deep breath, then spoke. "My name is Henry Willis. I used to work for Victor Grant." The whispering swelled again. Grant's face turned ashen. His smug smile vanished. He shot to his feet, voice like ice. "Your Honor, I object. This person has no right to be here." Grayson frowned, looking between the two men. "Mr. Willis, you've disrupted the court. You'd better prove your words have value." Willis raised the USB high, his voice growing steadier. "It's all here, Your Honor. The footage from that night, along with documents showing that Mr. Grant deliberately suppressed it." Amelia gripped the table, her knuckles white. "The footage. James's footage." Grant shouted, his voice hissing through his teeth. "He's lying, just a disgruntled man out for personal revenge. But Willis did not back down. Not inadmissible, blocked by you yourself, Mr. Grant." The room seemed to detonate. Grayson hammered the gavel again and again, his face tightening. "Order, I demand order in this courtroom." Amelia's heart pounded. She didn't know who Willis was, nor why he had chosen this moment to appear, but she felt it clearly this was a turning point. Not just to defend Peterson, but to unearth the truth buried in James's case. Grayson turned to Willis, his gaze knife-sharp. "Do you have authenticated evidence for what you've just said?" Willis nodded hard. "Lifting the USB, everything is here. Images and documents proving it was deliberately concealed." Grant's face twisted with fury. Amelia drew a deep breath, sprang to her feet, and her voice rang out firm and clear. "Your Honor, if this is true, it not only exonerates my brother, it exposes Mr. Grant's deceit. And if his testimony is false, then his attack on my credibility is nothing but a lie." The courtroom fell utterly silent as Judge Grayson rubbed his temples, exhaustion written on his face. "This case is about Mr. Peterson, not your brother, Miss Carter. However, if there is evidence bearing on the credibility of a key witness, the court is obliged to consider it." Victor Grant's jaw tightened, his voice grinding out, "This is a farce, Your Honor. I demand that that man be removed and that all his statements be stricken from the record." Grayson ignored him and signaled to the bailiff. "Seize the USB and hand it to the IT specialist for immediate verification." The bailiff stepped forward, took the USB from Willis, and left the room. The air felt cramped as if short on oxygen. All eyes locked on Grant, who now no longer looked smug but like a cornered animal. Amelia clutched her files, her head spinning. If the footage was real, it could clear James's name. But why had Willis chosen this moment to appear? Beside her, Mr. Peterson spoke softly, his voice trembling. "I'm sorry, this case is too complicated." Amelia looked up. He offered a wan smile. "Don't apologize. No one has ever fought for me the way you have." Amelia's chest tightened. Peterson reminded her of James, once wrongly convicted, standing alone against the whole system. No, this time she would not let history repeat itself. At last, the bailiff returned with a laptop. "Your Honor, the footage is authentic. No signs of editing." A wave of murmurs swept through the courtroom. Grayson nodded. "Play it now." The screen turned toward the gallery. Grainy, black-and-white images appeared the bar on that night. Grant sat with a few friends laughing loudly. James entered composed. He approached, said something indistinct, then turned to leave. But as James walked away, Grant sprang up, grabbed his arm, and shoved him hard. James turned back clearly, trying to calm things down. Yet it was Grant who threw the first punch. The scuffle was brief, but there was no denying it. Grant was the instigator. Amelia's eyes blurred. This was the truth, the evidence she had waited for all this time. Her brother had acted in self-defense. Grant flushed red, struggling to keep his composure. "Mr. Grant," Grayson's voice was icy. "How do you explain this?" Grant stammered, "Your Honor, I don't know what trick that man is pulling enough," Grayson barked. "This court does not tolerate perjury or obstruction of justice. Mr. Hayes, I ask that you reassess the value of this witness." Daniel Hayes, who had been silent until now, gave a slight nod. "Understood, Your Honor." Amelia stepped forward, her voice ringing clear. "Your Honor, this footage not only destroys Mr. Grant's credibility, it raises serious doubts about the accusations against my brother. I urge the court to exercise extreme caution in weighing his testimony." Grayson nodded, noted Miss Carter. "But let me remind you, this case is about Mr. Peterson. Stay focused." "Yes, Your Honor." Amelia replied, though inside her a thought blazed this footage could reopen James's case. The room gradually settled. Steel rose her face, cold as steel. "Your Honor, in light of these developments, I request a recess to recalibrate our strategy." Grayson sighed, checking the time. "Granted. 30 minutes." The room filled with clamor as everyone stood. Amelia dropped onto her seat, her head buzzing. She had won a battle, but the war remained. Steele and Grant would surely strike back. Lily appeared at her side, Ethan following behind. "Unbelievable," Lily whispered wide-eyed. "You took him down in open court?" Amelia managed a faint smile. "Not yet. There's still a storm ahead." Ethan tugged at his sister's sleeve, his eyes shining. "You'll win, right? You'll prove them all wrong." Amelia hugged the boy lightly, her heart twisting. "I'll do my very best, Ethan. That's all I can promise." Half an hour later, the courtroom was packed again. Grant returned, his face like stone. Steele stood beside him, sharp as ever, as if she had never faltered. Grayson entered and struck the gavel crisply. "We're back. Miss Carter, the floor is yours." Amelia rose, her heartbeat pounding. This time, every eye was on her, and she knew with Grant's credibility, shattered steel would attack fiercer than ever. "Your Honor." Her voice carried each word firm. "As I have demonstrated, the prosecution of Mr. Peterson contains serious gaps. The evidence clearly shows—" The entire room seemed to explode. Whispers and gasps erupted everywhere, while the confession of the man who had just entered hung in the air like a bolt of lightning. Grayson slammed the gavel, his voice booming. "Order, this court will come to order immediately." The man froze at the threshold, his eyes bewildered as if wrestling with his own decision. His gaunt face and the deep shadows under his eyes showed he had lost many nights of sleep before mustering the courage to come here. "What is your name?" Grayson's voice was firm. The man drew a deep breath, his hand gripping the edge of his coat. "I am Thomas Reed. I used to work in the company's accounting department, and yes, I was the one who fabricated those emails. I did it because Victor Grant forced me." The courtroom erupted again. Amelia felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room, but this time not from fear, from hope. This was the missing link she needed. Victor Grant shot to his feet, his face flushed with fury. "He's lying. This is a cheap trick by Miss Carter to save her brother and her client. Sit down." Mr. Grant Grayson roared, the gavel rattling like thunder. "If you interrupt again, I'll have the bailiffs remove you." Grant ground his teeth and was forced to sit, but his eyes burned towards Reed and Amelia like embers on the verge of bursting into flame. Amelia stood, her voice ringing strong and clear, yet carefully restrained. Your Honor, this confession reveals a serious conspiracy to destroy my client's reputation and pervert justice. I request permission to examine this witness." Grayson nodded, leaning slightly forward. "Granted. But remember, Miss Carter, this is a narrow borderland between truth and chaos. Ask your questions with great care." Amelia moved toward the witness stand, her eyes meeting Reed's, heavy with remorse. "Mr. Reed, you say Grant ordered you to fabricate the emails. Do you have any evidence to prove that Reed trembled, then pulled a battered old phone from his pocket? In here are the messages, his detailed instructions. I kept them in case my conscience couldn't bear it any longer." The entire courtroom held its breath. Steele turned pale while Grant gripped the armrest so hard the veins stood out. Amelia could feel her heart pounding. If those messages were real, not only would Peterson be saved, but James might have a chance at exoneration. Grayson turned to the bailiff. "Seize the device and send it to the IT specialist for immediate examination. And Mr. Reed, you will be kept under close watch until we verify everything." Reed nodded, as if relieved to finally lay down a burden. Amelia took in the scene, and a new resolve rose within her. For the first time, she saw clearly that she was no longer alone. Truth was slowly surfacing from the dark, and the liars were being driven into a corner. But at the same time, a cold premonition flickered through her mind. Grant and Steele would not sit still. They would strike back more fiercely than ever. The entire room seemed to explode. Whispers and gasps erupted everywhere, while the confession of the man who had just entered hung in the air like a bolt of lightning. Grayson slammed the gavel, his voice booming order. "This court will come to order immediately." The man froze at the threshold, his eyes bewildered as if wrestling with his own decision. His gaunt face and the deep shadows under his eyes showed he had lost many nights of sleep before mustering the courage to come here. "What is your name?" Grayson's voice was firm. The man drew a deep breath, his hand gripping the edge of his coat. "I am Thomas Reed. I used to work in the company's accounting department, and yes, I was the one who fabricated those emails. I did it because Victor Grant forced me." The courtroom erupted again. Amelia felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room, but this time not from fear, from hope. This was the missing link she needed. Victor Grant shot to his feet, his face flushed with fury. "He's lying. This is a cheap trick by Miss Carter to save her brother and her client. Sit down." Mr. Grant Grayson roared, the gavel cracking like fire. "If you interrupt again, I will have the bailiffs escort you out." Grant ground his teeth and was forced to sit, but his eyes shot towards Reed and Amelia, blazing like embers about to explode. Amelia stood, her voice ringing strong and clear, yet carefully restrained. "Your Honor, this confession has exposed a serious conspiracy to destroy my client's reputation and to distort justice. I request permission to examine this witness." Grayson nodded, leaning slightly forward. "Granted. But remember, Miss Carter, this is a thin borderland between truth and chaos. Ask your questions very carefully." Amelia stepped toward the witness stand, her eyes meeting Reed's, heavy with remorse. "Mr. Reed, you say Grant ordered you to fabricate the emails. Do you have any evidence to prove that Reed trembled, then pulled an old, battered phone from his pocket? In here are the messages, his detailed instructions. I kept them in case my conscience could no longer bear it." The entire courtroom held its breath. Steele went pale while Grant gripped the armrest so hard the veins stood out. Amelia could feel her heart pounding. If those messages were real, then not only would Peterson be saved, but James would also have a chance at exoneration. Grayson turned to the bailiff, confiscate the device, and deliver it to the IT specialist for immediate examination. "And Mr. Reed, you will be kept under close watch until we verify everything." Reed nodded, as if relieved to finally lay down a burden. Amelia took in the scene, and a new resolve rose within her. For the first time, she saw clearly that she was no longer alone. The truth was slowly emerging from the dark, and the liars were being driven into a corner. But at the same time, a cold premonition flickered through her mind. Grant and Steele would not sit still. They would strike back more fiercely than ever. The entire room sank into a taut silence as the bailiff took the old phone from Reed and immediately handed it to the IT specialist. Judge Grayson folded his arms across his chest, his gaze stern as if piercing every nook of deceit. "We will verify it on the spot," he declared, his voice resonant. "The truth will not be buried any longer." Grant jolted, glaring at Reed as if trying to burn him alive with his eyes. Steele stood motionless, her face ice cold, but her tightly pressed lips betrayed a rage being forced down. Within minutes, the IT specialist returned, carrying a printout and the phone. "Your Honor, these messages are genuine. They have never been altered." The content clearly shows that Victor Grant instructed Reed to fabricate the entire email chain to incriminate Peterson. The courtroom erupted. Shouts and whispers thundered. A few people blurted out, "My God." He staged all of it. Amelia felt her legs go weak. This was the moment she had waited for, the final proof to unmask the man who had wrecked her brother's life and sought to destroy her client. Grayson hammered the gavel repeatedly. "Order, I demand order now." He snapped his head toward Grant, his voice cold as steel. "Mr. Grant, do you have anything to say about these messages?" Grant's face flushed. Sweat beaded on his forehead. "Your Honor, this is a setup. Reed hates me. He fabricated this to ruin my name." Steele immediately cut in her voice, urgent yet authoritative. "Your Honor, please consider this is evidence not yet reviewed by a higher court. To rely on it at this moment, enough." Miss Steele, Grayson interrupted, his gaze sharp as a blade. "This court is not a stage for deceit. Both Mr. Grant and you will have to fully account for this. But first we must face the truth. The evidence shows Peterson was framed." Amelia drew a deep breath, tears rising but held back. She looked to Peterson. He was trembling, his eyes brimming. It was not just relief. It was the feeling of seeing light after a dark tunnel. Grant growled, slamming his hand on the table. "You'll regret believing this. You have no idea who you're dealing with." The bailiff immediately stepped forward, hand set on his shoulder, forcing Grant back into his seat. Steele stood close beside him, her face like a mask on the verge of cracking. Amelia clenched her hand, determination surging in her heart. This was no longer a battle to prove her ability. This was a fight to win justice for both Peterson and James, and this time she would not stop until every truth was laid bare. Willis stayed silent, his eyes distant, as if pulling an entire history of wrongdoing into view. When he said go deeper than the Grant affair, his voice was not merely a warning, it was an admission that what she had just uncovered was only the tip of an iceberg. Amelia sensed the cold iron scent of risk. But at the same time, a bright spark of hope flared. If Willis knew the network, he was the only lead to pull that curtain down. She softened her voice, stepped closer, pleading yet steady. You've helped me already. This time you can help more with us protecting you. We don't need empty words. I need evidence, documents, anything that shows the chain of transfers, orders, messages, things the court can accept. Willis looked at her, his hand trembling, then exhaled as if setting down a heavy load. They have records, fake books, transactions through a shell consulting company. I kept some copies, but if I go public, they will crush me. Amelia did not promise away what he feared, but she laid out a concrete plan. No emotion, only action. She would get Willis into temporary witness protection. Imagine them working with a lawyer, an independent journalist, and a forensic specialist. All evidence would be duplicated and examined by forensics to ensure an unassailable chain of custody, and they would file motions asking the court to subpoena the banks and the consulting firm to produce originals. Her words were so clear that Willis nodded, fear still present but a glimmer of trust beginning to shine. Over the next few days, Amelia's small team worked like a glass beehive. Lily handled media outreach to prepare a release plan if the files were authenticated. Ethan took the role of phone and food help, more practical than his age suggested. Amelia herself copied and carefully logged every scrap of document, noting dates, origins, and every lead. They knew one simple but decisive truth. Justice needs evidence. Evidence needs procedure. Procedure needs perseverance. Willis handed them a set of copies, remittance invoices, fake contracts between Grant's company and a shadowy consulting firm, along with several internal messages. Amelia swiftly arranged them into a timeline. The payments coincided with key dates in the investigation and James's trial. She reminded the forensic specialist to examine metadata file creation times, upload IP addresses to find hidden traces. If the metadata matched time zones and servers tied to Grant or his company, that would be the key to indicting him. While everything was moving forward, Grant did not sit still. News of the new evidence and Willis spread through legal and media channels as Amelia had feared he used money to buy temporary freedom, then ran a PR operation, half threatening, half self-congratulatory, spinning tales that Willis was a manipulator and Amelia a fraud. But each lie met prepared counterproof bank statements, certified printouts, confirmations from banks. They did not fight with emotion, they fought with evidence. To protect Willis, Amelia contacted a lawyer who had once worked with James, someone who had believed in them from the start, and together they filed for temporary witness protection while also seeking a search warrant for a branch office of the consulting company they were tracking. These procedures were not swift. The legal system is notoriously slow. But once the court agreed, they would have the authority to seize servers, original contracts, and copy banking transaction logs. One night, when Amelia returned to her apartment, she found scratch marks on the lock. Lily called, voice tight. "Are you safe?" The tremor in her friend's voice told her that the enemy had begun to strike at their private space. They didn't break in to take papers, that would be too obvious. But the sign was like a knife's warning. Grant and those behind him had far greater reach than imagined. Amelia, locked up tight, slept little and moved the most important copies to a bank-safe deposit box. When court resumed, Amelia presented illogical chain payments to the shell company, Willis's confirmation of direct orders and metadata proving altered emails. Daniel Hayes and the IT specialist confirmed the forensic report. Judge Grayson, after a series of legal arguments, ordered an expanded criminal investigation into Victor Grant, not only for fabricated evidence, but for a systemic conspiracy to manipulate proceedings. The pronouncement landed like a heavy blow. Grant now faced more charges, and James had a chance at reconsideration. But the film wasn't over. Amelia understood a truth. Removing a bought and paid for witness is not the same as dismantling the system that allowed the buying to happen. She looked at James's letter once more, feeling a responsibility heavier than ever. Her next plan was clear. Obtain original bank records, compel intermediaries to testify, and if necessary, hand the entire dossier to a major investigative journalist, so public opinion could reinforce the law. Before leaving court, she turned to Willis, gripping his hand tightly. "You've been brave. Now let's make this undeniable." At the corner of the street, Victor Grant's silhouette appeared like a chilling promise. He still had cards to play. And when you play cards with power, you're not only playing before the law, you're playing with lives and reputations. Amelia drew a deep breath, refusing to let fear steer her. She had won one battle, but the larger war lay ahead. And this time, she would not fight alone anymore. Amelia and Willis waited until the night had swallowed the city, then slipped into the consulting firm's building, a cold, gleaming block of glass set among empty streets. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady as she keyed in the side door code Willis had obtained beforehand. The smell of electrics and old cardboard soothed them as they slid along the corridor, the amber emergency lights dimly washing the room markers. Each step seemed to stretch on, but in Amelia's mind there was only one thought: if they didn't secure the evidence tonight, everything could disappear. Willis popped open a small door leading down to the server room with a quick, practiced motion. The room was filled with the delicate sounds of cooling fans, LEDs blinking like an electronic spine. Racks of servers towered before them, the digital treasure they needed to fish out with both hands and wits. Willis crouched and drew out a flash drive wrapped in a small piece of cloth. He moved systematically, leaving no trace. Quickly, Willis whispered, "I can pull the backup copies onto this, but we have to copy everything, not just a few files. The chain of custody has to remain intact." Amelia nodded, her eyes glued to their laptop screen. She typed RAND commands, checked the metadata folder by folder. The screen flickered lines of text racing each second, compressing an entire lifetime of hope into that tiny chip. When the copying started, Amelia felt a warm current flood her chest. They were getting closer to the truth. Suddenly, a dry click out in the corridor, like an accidental button press. Both of them froze. Willis peered toward the door, forcing himself to keep silent. The next moment stretched into an eternity. Footsteps on the stairs, a door opening, a security light flicking on. Willis pulled her down, pressing her back to the cold server rack, one hand over Amelia's mouth to keep any sound from slipping out. "Stay calm," he whispered. "We only need a few more minutes." But fate wouldn't be so gentle. The corridor security lights pulsed, signaling a routine sweep. The copy wasn't done. Progress sat at 35%, like an iceberg half melted in spring. Cold sweat gathered at Amelia's nape. She leaned, trying to time the screen which files had transferred, which hadn't. Every file name was a link in the chain, a contract, a wire instruction, a directive email. At that instant, the server room door swung wide, the corridor light about to spill in a silhouette, cutting the threshold like a blade. A low, cold voice sounded. "Who's there? Identify yourselves." Willis didn't have time to plan. His hand slid, he tucked the flash into his breast pocket, then stepped out wearing the calm posture of a night shift tech. Amelia eased after him, heart about to burst. They had grabbed what they could, part of the copy finished on the flash part, still in progress on the laptop. The newcomer was a tall security guard with a hard face. He stepped into the room, his flashlight sweeping across the rack, stopping at the laptop. Willis answered in an even tone. "Sorry, saw the alarm, came down to check the backup. System threw an error earlier." The guard frowned, though suspicion didn't fully surface. He slowly asked their names and requested ID. Willis produced a forged badge. He'd prepared a fragile little talisman. The guard took it, glanced from the laptop screen back to them, and with a flicker of reluctance, said, "Fine, quick check, and then upstairs." He left, his heavy steps fading. When the door closed, Amelia exhaled as if dropping a boulder. But the relief was brief. They knew the badge had only bought them minutes. They had to leave now and take everything that mattered. Willis yanked the flash, tossed it into Amelia's hand. "Take it." "I'll clean up our traces," he said. "Go first." Amelia cradled the flash like something sacred, her heart plunging into a pit as she slipped back into the corridor. Their footsteps were quick like kids sneaking out, except this time they weren't running away. They were carrying evidence. She thought of James, of Peterson, of everyone shoved into the dark by the powerful. Every step was a vow. They escaped the building into the sharp, cold breath of night. But as their car melted into the city streets, Willis leaned forward, his face grave. "We have one set, but not the whole thing. They have off-site backups, raid cards stashed elsewhere. We've only cut off the tip. If we want it all exposed, we have to trace those backups, and that means we'll have to confront them directly, and it won't just be Grant against us." Amelia tightened her grip on the flash. Exhaustion, fear, and an unshakable resolve all poured into her gaze. "Then we take it all the way." And as their car slid past the last run of streetlights, a sedan idled in the distance, a figure flickering inside a sign that could not be good. They had touched something bigger than they had imagined. The next wave was already rising. Amelia looked straight at Sarah, each word slicing the air ready. In her eyes, there was no longer a bewildered 16-year-old. There was someone who had lost too much to back down. She summarized the entire chain: James's letter, Willis bringing the USB, the bank statements, the fabricated emails, and most of all the money flows into the shell company. Every detail she spoke, Sarah noted cleanly, the journalist's eyes flashing with a cold certainty. This wasn't a scandal. It was an empire of deceit. Sarah didn't rush to promise anything, but her tone showed she understood the game. "I can expose this, but once the public fire starts, it will bring a storm. We need strategy. Authenticate every document, secure a court order to retrieve originals, and if needed, publish a coordinated investigative piece with a trusted organization to protect the source. You won't be standing alone." That statement was like a blade touching the long-standing loneliness of Amelia and Willis. They had to step into the light, but they needed someone to shield them. Sarah proposed a 3-step plan: 1, comprehensive forensic verification for all files and statements. 2, simultaneously contact a law firm specializing in witness protection to officially place Willis under protection. 3, prepare a coordinated investigative release to be published once the court had ordered the collection of the original materials in order to create fair legal pressure and reduce the risk of evidence being frozen. Amelia felt her heart grow both lighter and heavier at once. Lighter because they had a powerful ally. Heavier because it meant she would have to make everything public, a revelation that could save James, but also expose her entire family, the whole painful past. She nodded, resolute. "Do it. I want justice, not just for my brother, but for everyone thrown into the dark." Sarah looked at the two of them and then spoke plainly. "Be prepared. When the article goes up, they'll counterattack with everything: lawsuits, media assaults, personal smears. They'll try to buy time, buy fake evidence, buy anyone they can. I will need irrefutable proof and an exit route for you two if necessary." The next 2 weeks were taut as a drawn string. Sarah provided a reporter's account, connected them with an independent forensic specialist, and a witness protection attorney agreed to take the case. Willis was placed straight into temporary protection. He was given a safe residence, his phone number changed, and his debriefings conducted under official supervision. Every document copy was sent for verification of metadata, digital signatures, IP addresses, and file transfer traces. Every gap was combed through meticulously. Meanwhile, Grant did not stay quiet. The first articles appeared snippets smearing Willis, casting doubt on Amelia's motives, and reports that Margaret Steele was calling for a review of the evidence's admissibility. A campaign to mislead the public began. Grant used his connections to deny to claim he was being framed. But this time his counterattack slammed into a solid wall bank, statements, confirmations from foreign banks, and a forensic report that did not match his claims. On the night before Sarah planned to publish the first investigative piece, Amelia did not sleep. Her mind churned. If the public exposed it, the court could not ignore it. If the court did not intervene, the press would raise the pressure until the investigation had to expand. She thought of James in his cell, the one who had given her the letter that lit this flame, and she promised herself, whatever happens, she will see this through. When the first article was published, the headline was as hard and cold as a slap in the face. A purchased system evidence shows a high-profile businessman manipulated proof to imprison the innocent. Public opinion exploded. Breaking news flooded in TV channels, dissected at interview requests poured down. Grant responded with an angry statement, but now the public had seen the numbers, the emails, the money transfers. As the wave of press crashed ashore, the legal collaboration took effect. Court orders were issued to freeze accounts, lock down offices, and seize servers. The police broadened their investigation, and the anti-corruption agency began retrievals. Margaret Steele was compelled to give an accounting. Daniel Hayes was summoned to testify regarding witness identification and initial handling. But victory was not yet complete. On the night Grant was taken into temporary custody on multiple charges, Amelia received an anonymous threatening call, a man's voice cold, just a few words. "Don't dig too deep, little girl. There are things I will not allow anyone to drag out." Her heart froze for a moment, but then the flame rose again. She had seen the system's dark face, and now she had touched it. The final scene of this chapter was not an ending, but a vow. Amelia stood on the balcony holding James's letter. Below, the city still bustled, as if unaware that a battle was underway to change the fates of many. She closed her eyes, drew a deep breath, and whispered, "I will not stop. Not until every truth is exposed." And in the darkness, a sedan quietly backed away from the corner. Someone was watching, counting. The next wave had been set in motion. Breaking news, the cold handcuffs on Victor Grant's wrists, and the hatred in his eyes as he was dragged from his mansion. These were images Amelia Carter knew would be etched into her memory for life. But for her, this victory was not merely about toppling a powerful man. It symbolized something greater: justice, truth, and the belief that the system that once betrayed James could be forced to make it right. In the quiet conference room at the federal office that night, as Detective Ramirez handed her a hot cup of coffee, Amelia finally allowed herself to breathe a sigh of relief. "You did well," he said. Sarah entered right after, holding her phone, a beaming smile on her face. "The story's everywhere. The Justice Department has officially expanded the investigation. Grant has no place to hide anymore." Amelia smiled softly, but it was the first smile without the weight of despair pressing down on her. 3 weeks later, in the appeals court, Amelia sat in the front row, gripping her trembling hands. When the lawyer Sarah had introduced stood up, his voice resonated in the packed room. James Carter was wrongfully convicted due to manipulated evidence. Today we have the chance to correct that mistake. As the judge read the verdict, tears flowed from Amelia. "The conviction against James Carter is overturned. He will be released immediately." James turned to her, a tearful, disbelieving smile. She rushed to him, wrapping her arms around him, an embrace that held all the years of suffering. "You did it," James whispered, his voice trembling. Amelia shook her head, wiping her tears. "We did it. You believed in me when no one else did." In the weeks that followed, Amelia unexpectedly became the center of public attention. The media wanted interviews, legal organizations sent support letters, and even law schools reached out. But when she sat with James at the family dinner table, the only plan she had was, "I want to really study law. This time it's the official path. No more pretending, no more bending the law. I want to be a real lawyer." James looked at her, his eyes shining with pride. "You'll be an amazing lawyer. Not because I think so, but because I know so." Years later, Amelia Carter stood in the very courtroom, no longer the teenage girl mocked, but a young, well-dressed attorney, her voice full of authority. Before her, her first client was a single mother wrongly accused of theft. Amelia turned to face the prosecutor across the room, then held her head high. Her voice resonated firm and clear. "Your Honor, I'm here to protect a person who deserves to know the truth, and I intend to do so until the end." In that moment, Amelia's journey was complete, from a girl dismissed in court to a true lawyer, one who understands that courage is not the absence of fear, but continuing even when fear still exists. underscore 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 underscore. Outro. Amelia Carter entered the courtroom surrounded by skepticism and ridicule. A 16-year-old girl with no degree, no fame, only carrying unshakable faith and a letter from her brother who had lost everything to injustice. And it was that very faith that turned the tide of the trial, exposed lies, and sparked the light of justice where it seemed extinguished. And the story of Amelia Carter, the genius girl, who was once mocked, now a respected lawyer, will forever stand as proof that when the truth is protected by heart and will, it will never be buried. Though justice may be buried, it never disappears. And sometimes the smallest people can bring about the greatest change, because justice doesn't come from the powerful. It comes from those who dare to stand up for the truth. What do you think of Amelia Carter's journey? If it were you, would you have the courage to stand up against a whole system to protect the truth? Please share your thoughts in the comments. What does this story mean to you? If this story resonates with you, hit like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories.